All right. Hello. My name is Garrett Duncan. Hello, Professor, or whoever is watching this. This course is Philosophy 101. This is my presentation assignment on David Hume. Um, I chose option number 2, which is Hume's perception of free will and its critics. I chose this one because, as you'll see, it has impacted my life. And when we were talking about it in class, it made me start asking myself questions about a ton of different things. Okay, so the first question that we have is, what is Hume's position on the topic of human free will? And I think it's important to go over first that Hume is a compatibilist. This means that he believes that we have a free will, but physical determinism is still a thing. Um, physical determinism means that the past and present determines what will happen in the future. An example of this could be like lining up a ton of dominoes, maybe, and it being inevitable that the next one and the next one and the next one will fall over, where one thing happens and it makes another thing happen. But what does all of this really mean? And let's answer the initial question. This means that Hume does believe that we have a certain amount of free will. I will get into the extent and the certain amount in a little bit. However, due to things like past experiences and prior knowledge, in Hume's opinion, our futures can almost be predictable. And this kind of goes back to the physical determinism, where what happens in the past will happen again in the future. All right, and now it's time to go over that extent of free will that we do have. Hume believes that you are free to act on desires. However, he believes in event causal relationships, where if something happens in your life, then you will respond in a certain way. Uh, Basically, that's kind of like how heat being a result of fire, we talked about in class a lot. And when we talked about that, I actually thought of a story from my big brother. And you're probably wondering who this person is down in the bottom right. That is him when he was very little. And when he was a little bit younger than that age, we had a stove on top of it. And he basically put his hand on the burning stove and he burned his hand really, really bad and had to go to the emergency room. And he's never done that again. He's afraid to even use the stove because of it. And from me hearing all those stories, I'm like super careful whenever I'm around that stuff. And it's not the best because it doesn't let me cook that much, but it's okay. But this leads me to a question that I thought in class after thinking about Shane, my brother, doing that. And it is, does someone that is younger normally have more free will than someone who is older and has experienced more in David Hume's eyes? Because if he believes that free will is limited due to your past experiences or prior knowledge to things, then basically somebody that's younger should have more free will because they have not experienced as much and they have not had as much time to have prior knowledge for things and stuff like that. They just kind of do as they please. And on the contrary, there was Peter van Inwagen. I am probably butchered that. And he's an incompatibilist libertarian And he says that we do have free will because there's moral responsibility. People are morally responsible for their actions. And this is kind of like in our everyday life because we follow rules, we follow guidelines and all that. And our will is not subject to physical determinism. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier. He doesn't believe that our will comes from past experiences. He believes that what you do is basically up to you. And this figure below right here is basically our choices that we think we have. And if you look closely, these branches aren't fully connected to the main road. And that's because basically it's like things that we could see ourselves doing, and they seem to be a possible outcome of our situation, but there is a main road that inevitably we will follow, basically. And in his argument, basically, we'll call it, he described these branches as being physically impossible. And up next, what does Invagin find missing from Hume's argument? So basically, Invagin would say that our will is not subject to determinism. This is due to him believing that free will and determinism are incompatible because he believes free will is a necessary condition of being morally responsible. So basically, if you have free will, you can't have determinism in Vaughan's eyes, and he would say that Hume should have elaborated or maybe given examples of how these two can go together. And another thing is their views on causation. Vaughan is an agent causation, and Hume is an event causation. And basically, we already went over event causation earlier, but agent causation is someone having a will, like when someone has a will, it is necessary for I'm sorry. Someone having a will is necessary for an event to happen. So basically, you would not be able to cause something unless you had a will to make that thing happen. And basically, an agent causes an event to happen. Give me a second. Okay, so who is more persuasive? And in my personal opinion, I believe that Vaughan's argument is more persuasive. And this is due to me believing that we actively participate in making our own past from decisions that we are making in the present. And I also found the parts about morality incredibly persuasive from Vaughan's argument because we experience these things in everyday life, like I talked about earlier. Morality leads to rules, which leads to our discussion that also had me thinking about sins and all of that stuff. And I actually talked about that with some of my friends about sins. And so that was pretty cool to have something that I learned in the class to talk about in my real life. But the next thing is I think it's worth mentioning that I could be thinking Vaughan's way is better just because it's something that I want to believe. It's almost like scary to believe that I don't have my own free will. And I also would say it's worth noting that Invagin seemed to argue against him directly, while Hume came much before Invagin's time and couldn't argue some of Invagin's counterpoints. It's almost like unfair, I feel, to address these against each other. Maybe not, but it's almost kind of like reminds me of a political debate where both sides are always looking for the last word to get in. And like, even in the last election, it always seemed like they were trying to get the last word in just so that their point was better, I guess, because they could respond to the other person. So, some final reflections after all of this, and a story about how it's affected my life. After learning about both of these viewpoints, even though I find Invagin's more persuasive, there are still many things that I agree with from David Hume, something that I have thought a lot about, and I now agree with from Hume are some of his thoughts about causation and how we make decisions based on past experiences. And this type of causation has answered a lot of my questions as to why I act the way that I act, why I do the things that I do, and how I see others differ from me in different lives and how they act and react to things, because we all go through different things in our lives, and that's what makes us, I guess, act the way I act. And this dude in the bottom right is my best friend, and lately he's been going through a lot of bad stuff. He lost a very near and dear person to him lately, and he just went through a very bad breakup where he was dating this girl for a long time, and he was very concerned about his decision making lately, and having this discussion about how maybe we are doing the things and making these decisions based on our past experiences and all this stuff. It's made us have a more positive outlook and think deeper about why we do the things we do, and think about how, like, in a bad situation, we can look back and think about past experiences to help us make a better choice in our future. But I think that this belief of mine goes back to what I was talking about earlier, how it could be something that I just want to believe because it makes bad decisions seem not as bad because it's just the way things are. But either way, thank you for listening. I hope you have a wonderful day.